Hey everyone, this is Coach Guest from Provo High School in conjunction with Play Versus. This is a video about starting a high school Overwatch 2 team. There are some things, or two big categories that you need. You need people and you need gear. Working with the people involved can be easy, but it's also sometimes the hardest thing you'll do in this process. Also, people is where you'll find some of your non-starters that need to be negotiated before anything else goes forward. Also, working with the people is usually pretty cost neutral. Whereas the gear gets into hardware, there's different challenges that come with that, both financially, there's different ways to solve problems, and a lot of times it involves money. So we're going to start by looking at the people that you need to start an Overwatch 2 team. You need the students, the players in this case. You, the coach, as well as the support team. And we're going to go into each of those categories. First off, for students, you need a minimum of 5 players. You need 1 tank, 2 damage dealers, and 2 supports. A couple items. For tanks, you can only have 1 tank in the game at a time. When we get into some of the tactics about how tanks play, we might talk about how having 2 tank players can be useful and they switch back and forth, but we'll get into that in a different video. Damage dealers tends to be the most popular role on a team. But there's also a very wide pool of heroes to pick from, so sometimes students will develop 1 or 2 heroes they're especially good at, which allows them to be better at certain maps than others and gives some more rotation so more players can get in. And then lastly, you have 2 supports. Some players mistakenly call them healers, especially if they come from a tower defense style game or an MMO style of game. But tactically, they do so much more, and we'll get into that and all these other things about all these roles in different videos about the roles and the hero rosters that they have. So again, you need to have a minimum of 5 students. Play Versus allows a maximum of 12 students, but I personally recommend that Goldilocks sweet spot between 6 and 8. You need to have subs available in case someone is injured, ill, unavailable, for whatever reason. But the bigger you get, that means fewer players are playing. And especially with high school esports, playing in the games is really the best training that kids can get. And so getting more people more playing time is at least for me personally, is a real priority. For my varsity team, I hyper specialize and get down to the nitty gritty, but really as much as possible, you want to get as many people playing. Another sweet spot to consider is if you can get 10 to 14 players. That allows for internal practices where the team plays itself instead of going into the random matchmaker in Overwatch 2. This can be really useful for internal practices, and I'll get into more of that in a different video. Lots of little video starters here to go off of. Up next is your student leadership. So again, you have your minimum of 5, maximum of 12. These 3 roles within your team can honestly be all in the same person. At other times, it'll also branch out into different roles. The first one is your best player. They'll typically have experience with this game or other similar FPS games. They play tactically sound, they have good game sense as far as what's going on, and they have solid aim mechanics as far as how they move and activate their abilities. You need to identify this player because it allows the tactician, whether it's you, another coach that you bring in, to design effective strategy around your team's strengths. And sometimes you may have a best tank player or best heroes for certain tanks, and then a better DPS player and a best support player, and you build around that. For example, this last year, our 2 of our best players played technically off-meta heroes that were not the pinnacle best heroes based on sound tactics, but they played well together in that, and it took us very far into the playoffs because of how they played together. Up next is the team captain. When you think of a team captain, like again for other team sports, there are very positive and negative tropes about the team captain, but in all of its best, building your team, your brand, your team captain should be the best person at keeping your team together, helping them fight in gaming, what we call tilt, when players get upset and start whining or complaining or getting at each other even. Your team captain should be able to help mitigate that. They need to be really good at synergy and getting people to work together, helping people realize, yes, you're sitting out this game, but we're not just benching you and dumping you. And also in public, in your school and in your community, they should be a good image for your team. And then also within the Overwatch community, gaming in general is known for having different toxic personalities. Your team captain should not be one of those. If your team captain is getting banned and silenced for saying nasty things in game, they probably shouldn't be your team captain. A lot of times, these two will be the one and the same. This last year, I was very lucky that our best player and our team captain was the same person. In years past, we had a very solid Scene 2 player who was only playing semi-pro because they weren't old enough to play pro yet. But they weren't the best team captain, and so I didn't name them team captain. And ultimately, they left the team over cohesion issues and what that player wanted. And so your team captain will not always be your best player, but they should be your most reliable player, the best image of your team. They should be a player that you don't plan on subbing out. They should be in the whole time. And then this third category is your shot caller. Again, this is more of a tactics discussion that we'll get into in a separate video. But you need to have a person who is leading the conversation in game. During games, coaches are not supposed to be coaching over the shoulder. That is a topic that we'll get into once we get into like the rule book of things. But your shot caller, whether the coach is talking to the team or not, the shot caller should be the one picking the routes that the team goes, choosing ultimates to use, helping coordinate team abilities. It's very similar to what the team captain does in terms of general team cohesion and synergy, but this is in the game. They need to be a good tactician. They need to be collaborative. They need to be flexible. They need to communicate well. One of the keys to in-game communication is being quick and concise. You need to be able to call an enemy, a target, a location, go, instead of telling a 20-minute story about what's going to happen. So yeah, those are three of the critical roles that happen within a team. This is, again, a little sneak peek into a tactics video. Your shot caller also doesn't have to be the same person each match. There are times where, at least for me as a frequent tank player, I will be the shot caller as a tank player. But then there are other times when I'm playing with a better support player or a DPS player or someone who has a better vantage of what's going on, or they're controlling more of the match than I am, and I'll hand that off. I'll say, hey, you shot call. I'm just going to shut up and tank. And so working collaboratively, you as the coach need to help set this. So if you find yourself in a tactical situation where actually we need Brittany to be the shot caller and have Jason take a back seat right now. Moving on, your coaches. Honestly, of all three of these, your coaches are the most important component of your team. All of your coaches must be non-students, or non-high school students, I should clarify, 18 plus years of age, and meet the requirements of your local school district for working with students. A lot of unfortunate incidents can be prevented with active and responsive coaching. This doesn't mean that you have to be a pro at the game or even like playing the game, but you as the adult need to be present and involved in everything. There are different needs that teams have and players and coaches have, but the number one that I can't emphasize this enough: be present, be active and engaged, even if you know nothing about the game of Overwatch. Behavioral issues, match management, player management as far as getting players in and out of the game, as well as interfacing with play versus. There are ways that the coaches can talk with the company to make sure that things go fluidly. Like I said, a lot of the coaches and supervisors are not Overwatch 2 players. So how do you, the complete new player, coach kids on how to play this game? The first thing I've got to emphasize: do not leave this to a student or an alumni. When you have students, there's a difference between peer-to-peer mentoring and completely coaching everything up. There are some like one-on-one niche cases where a one-on-one peer teacher can help lift them quite a bit. But if you have one student teaching 5 to 10 teammates and their one student voice it's going to put a lot of pressure on that student, and it's going to strain that peer-to-peer relation between those students. So as much as possible, I've got to emphasize, do not leave coaching to a student, or even like a recent alumni who's just graduated. They both have really good, valuable places, and they can help your team, and they can take a lot off of your plate as the coach. But don't just say, hey, I don't know this game, you do it. You need to be present during that process. Even if someone else is handling the tactics and the hero pools and the map and all that game stuff, you as the coach need to be present for that. So again, if you know nothing about playing Overwatch and you're just trying to figure out this game and help your kids play better, here's some resources that you can use as a complete non-gamer. The first one is the Play versus Discord server. There are other gamer coaches that can help coach your team up. Hey guys, my team's really struggling. We're not playing well. Can you tell me what to do better? And a lot of us will help out. As well as other super coaches. These are coaches that have been vetted through Play Versus, that have experience with the program, that have the skills and the willingness to help other coaches develop in the game. Going away from Play Versus, there are other competitive Overwatch 2 Discords that have professionals, semi-pro players, college players, retired players, folks that are willing to coach up teams. Some of the more professional ones will charge. There are also, particularly in like college and tier 2, folks that are just trying to get into coaching. And if like, oh, you're doing high school, I'll do it for free. Me personally, I've coached several different groups, like on one-off sessions for free, just because I want to help people be better. But if you want someone to help coach during practice every week, that might cost you some money that you need to look at. There are also different websites that have like limited coaching tips, and they also have coaching videos, and they have wider coaching libraries even that you can buy into if that's an option that you're looking at. The next big one is the Overwatch 2 replay tool, as well as video game recording. I think of it like watching film from a traditional sport, where you can go back into the mode and watch the game over again. Whether you do it through the Overwatch 2 replay system, or you can also use a program called OBS to record the game while you play it and then watch that video again later. Both of these are really useful tools for analyzing gameplay and giving feedback. Even as a non-player, if you just walk the players through this and have them watch their gameplay over again and have them ask critical questions of themselves, without a lot of feedback, it might not be as helpful right away. But the more they get used to doing that, even just re-experiencing that game again, they're going to think of things and remember things and see things that they didn't when they were playing the game live. So I think of it kind of like a rough draft. You know, if you go back, you got your rough draft being the actual game you played, and then you can think of ways to refine it, and you can think of ways to refine it, and then you jump into a game and do it again, you should be better for that. And lastly, again, my apologies, this is very much a summary video. We'll get into lots of different break-off stuff. Custom game modes. Instead of just jumping into quick play, or even competitive, and just playing the game a lot of players need that just to get used to how the game plays and feels. But when you find yourself struggling in particular situations, custom modes are really great at practicing those specific situations. A couple that we use with Winton Lab is we use aim trainers. They're not as high functioning as some of the separate aim trainers you can get through different games that are just built around training your aim, but just getting used to aim training with the in-game models. We have duel simulators where you get used to playing one-on-one. There are lots of one-on-one situations in Overwatch 2 that require individual skill. There are different scenario trainers where you can practice using ultimates or mitigating ultimates, tracking cooldowns, things like that. So yeah, as far as getting your kids better, the coaching tactical side of it, I'm working to develop a series of videos that will help coaches with no game experience train up players so that they can play better. But I've got to reemphasize, don't just have a kid do this. Like all other team sports, there are places where your players will teach you things that you didn't know. They'll give you suggestions. I encourage you to listen to those. But don't just rely on those unilaterally. You need to be the final adult in the room who says what happens, not just a child. Up next is your support team. A lot of times, especially like with esports and Overwatch, this all gets dumped onto you. You are the esports person. And even if that is you, there are several lines of support that you need to have. You need to have permission. You make sure that the right people at your school and your district have given you permission to play this game in an organized fashion. Some districts have explicit anti-FPS policies. Others have exceptions and parent waivers. Make sure that you're in the clear with those rules. Similarly, make sure you're in the clear with your financials. If you need to buy gear and jerseys and stuff like that, you need to make sure you have approval to spend that money. Honestly, I would say even before financials is facilities. Play Versus requires a wired connection in one site. I say this carefully because I don't want to create lots of exceptions. There are times, especially with Overwatch 2, where students playing at their respective homes can work. It's not recommended. For team building and coaching and coach monitoring, being in one site is really what you need to design for. I would not launch a team if you don't have a site where everyone can get together and practice and play. Some places will let you use a computer lab. Some places will not let you use a computer lab. Some places will create a separate room just for esports, or there are all kinds of different situations. You need to make sure that you have a space to play, and you have permission to play, and that you have a reliable way to get there and every single time you're going to practice or compete. And then the last one, in many districts, you're probably this IT person who has the power and switches to look at the network and the hardware of things. You need to make sure that, in this case, Overwatch 2 is cleared through your district network. A lot of times districts will block the video game entirely because they don't want kids playing video games in the middle of class. Makes sense. But in certain cases, they can clear devices or create a cleared connection. There are different options and workarounds, but you need to talk with them to make sure that it gets cleared. And then my recommendation is having a personal cell number for an IT manager, someone that you can reach on game day and emergency. I've had it happen a handful of times, but not many. I've played several seasons and dozens of matches through Play Versus, both competitively and scrimmages, and I've only had, I think, 2 tech issues come up. But thankfully, I was able to text our district tech person, and one time we got it fixed in time for the match. And that's your support team. So really, these are all the people you need to make this thing work. This is where you might run into roadblocks. If you have questions or needs, I would encourage you to message me in Discord at Coach Guess in the Play Versus Discord, or reach out to me on YouTube or in game, and I'll do what I can to help you out as far as establishing and building your program.